All right, folks, continuing now with your notes for Chapter 16. In this video, we're going to talk about the specifics of the radio format. Formats live and die on conditions external to themselves, things like competition, changing demographics, as well as the format itself. Sometimes you have all sorts of different companies and all sorts of different people vying for similar audiences. And the problem is people move into areas, move out of areas. Trends will change over a period of time. Certain artists will become popular. Certain artists will lose favor. Styles of music and the tastes of people change from time to time. So it's an ever-moving organism in terms of trying to impact an audience with the things that they want at a particular time. Basically, there are all sorts of different types of formats that are out there. Depending on the way that you count and categorize, there can be anywhere from 20 to 50 or more different types of formats that you can find on radio. There's a list in your textbook to see how intricate some of these things can be. Latest trends in formats. I've given you a link to some information that you may find interesting, and you can also refer to the table in your notes. Note that the chart does not showcase the increased growth in popularity of urban and Hispanic formats. This chart basically assumes a English-speaking audience in the United States. And you can see what some of the top radio formats were as of 2018. Does it surprise you of what you see up at the very top? It's not a music format. There has been a rise in the number of people that have listened to news and talk over the past several years. And then you see what some of the other more popular stations are. Some people may not necessarily admit that they listen to certain types of stations, but these are the ones that seem to grab the most earlobes for one reason or another. Adult contemporary is one of the big ones there. AC is a wide-ranging format that generally includes a few current popular hits. These are called currents. Makes sense. Recent hits known as recurrents, and older songs known as oldies. 101.5 is a good example of an AC station in the Raleigh market. These are usually designed for general listeners. They have a relatively affluent demographic, meaning they've got a decent amount of disposable income, and they do well, especially with women in their 30s. So they're trying to reach out to the professional woman. Many times they're reaching out to the moms that are out there that are tuning in and listening in. And the adult contemporary format does a really good job of impacting that audience. Adult standards, also known as middle of the road or MOR. This is going to be some of your older, timeless, popular music that's out there. Your Tony Bennett, your Frank Sinatra, your Brenda Lee, all of those folks. Think of it as pre-1975 adult contemporary. Now, there is a station that does this in the Raleigh market. It's on the AM dial. AM 850 plays a lot of this kind of music. The classical format usually includes orchestral and opera and sometimes some show music, show tunes and musicals and that sort of thing. But for the most part, we're in the Beethoven and Mozart and Chopin sort of genre here with the classical format. And there is a classical station in Raleigh. Classic rock might be best defined as the top hits from the best 100 rock albums of all time, without any new releases being included into the mix. Sometimes something newer might get in there if there's a timeless band that puts something out, but for the most part, they're kind of locked into a certain time period. Traditionally, this has been late 60s to mid 70s, but these days we're seeing more 80s music come in there as well, with some of the popular songs from hair bands and things like that. 100.7 in Raleigh is a good example of a classic rock station. Classic hits, a little bit different. Same era for the most part, but instead of some of the more active rock sort of sounds, it might include a lot more pop style music from eras in the past. 102.9 is going to be a good example of that in our market. CHR, Contemporary Hit Radio, also known as Top 40 or Current Hit Radio, typically features heavy day parting. And what that means is that there's a lot of personality-driven radio. There's a lot of show-driven radio in the CHR format. Largely because you have different audiences that are tuning in at different parts of the day. So we have a couple of stations that do that in the Raleigh market. You have Pulse FM, you have G105. They put different spins on what they play in terms of how they articulate the format over the air, but they're both examples of it. They both tend to have younger audiences listening in, and they tend to have a lower cost per thousand due to the lack of affluent listeners. Because it is a younger audience, most younger people don't have a ton of disposable income for things that don't include the word Happy Meal in them. So it's not necessarily going to be a station, again, that every sort of advertiser wants to reach out to, because they're going to see their messaging be ineffective in terms of return on investment, even though their advertising may reach a lot of listeners, because it's not reaching the right listeners. Country audiences tend to be splintered and fiercely loyal to their particular splinter of their music. A great example of this is classic country versus modern country. Now, country doesn't necessarily have a particularly affluent demographic, but the audience is loyal. Country music fans are tried and true country music fans. Two major stations in the Raleigh market that offer country. You see them on your screen. Modern rock, also called new rock, features very progressive music, including many selections that would be characterized as alternative new rock. Alt 95.3 would be a good example of that here in Raleigh-Durham. New adult contemporary, also known as smooth jazz. There's some distinct differences between those two formats, but there's a bit of crossover there. These stations play easygoing music designed to create a jazzy feel or mood. Music tends to be medium tempo, not too fast, not too slow. Sometimes referred to as new adult contemporary, and we do have a station in Raleigh that portrays a lot of that kind of music. Talked about News Talk earlier. It has a fairly affluent demographic. People that tend to listen to News Talk tend to be decision makers in the places that they work in. They're managers, they're CEOs. They tend to make more money at their jobs. Therefore, they have more disposable income, are looking to do things like investments and real estate and things like that. And they tend to be older listeners as well. So on one hand, they're not necessarily going to be attracted to things that are very trendy or popular, but they are going to make informed decisions on the things that they hear. And we do have several talk stations in the Raleigh-Durham market. One thing to note that WUNC 91.5 FM is the market's NPR station, which is a non-commercial radio station. And we'll talk about some of the nuances as we go along between commercial radio and non-commercial radio. Most rotations in oldie formats center on an identifiable 15-year period. These stations By the way, they tend to be moving away from using the term oldies on the air. I've not heard of a station that's done that in recent history, except in some smaller markets. You still have a station that brands itself as oldies. As I was growing up, oldies was kind of music from the 50s and 60s. Nowadays, we tend to think of oldies stations as late 70s into the 80s, even going into the 90s. Religious stations can take the form of spoken word, such as a teaching and talk station. Also various music tastes that run the gamut from things that sound more contemporary to Southern gospel to black gospel, and some other, stations that will do just hymns, if you will. And there's a few stations in our market that have different examples of ways that they proclaim the good word, if you will. Album-oriented rock, AOR. It features longer, heavy rock cuts. Many classic rock and active rock stations will do longer, deep cuts on evenings and weekends. Longer jam sessions or longer instrumentals. A lot of times, the listeners to these kinds of stations really love and appreciate when they can just sit and listen to the band play or just do an extended cut of one of their favorite songs. AOR allows for that to happen. A variety of Spanish formats have become red hot because of the growing number of Latinos in the United States. And it's not just Spanish speakers that are listening to Spanish language radio. A lot of, you'd be surprised at the number of people that are listening to Hispanic radio from all different walks of life. You can say the same thing about urban stations, R&B, rap, hip-hop, hard rock, other formats particularly designed to appeal to young urban audiences. And it is becoming more and more popular, not just with the target races that urban has traditionally tried to cater to. So there's a brief overview of formats. We'll finish up the notes with part C of this video. I'll catch you over there.